The morning sun barely touched the dusty ground when Ravi walked through the crowded market streets. His footsteps were heavy, like someone carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. The smell of fresh vegetables mixed with the sound of people bargaining over prices. But Ravi wasn't here to buy anything today. He was here to lose everything that mattered. His daughter Priya had been awake since dawn, helping her mother pack a small cloth bag. She didn't know why, but something felt different about this morning. Her 3 younger brothers were still sleeping when she quietly swept the floor of their tiny mud house. At 16, Priya had grown used to taking care of everyone. She cooked, cleaned, helped with homework, and still found time to dream about becoming a teacher someday. Papa looks worried, she had whispered to her mother while folding her only good dress into the bag. Her mother turned away quickly, wiping her eyes with the edge of her worn cotton scarf. Just ... just be a good girl today, Beta. Remember that? We love you very much. Priya felt a strange knot forming in her stomach, but she trusted her parents completely. 3 months of no rain had destroyed their small farm. The crops that should have fed the family and paid their debts had turned brown and died in the fields. The moneylender came every week now, demanding payment with interest that kept growing bigger and bigger. Last week, he had threatened to take their house. Yesterday, he said he would take one of the children instead. Ravi had spent all night walking around their village, looking at the stars and trying to find another way. He had sold everything they owned, their bicycle, his wife's jewelry, even the cooking pots. It still wasn't enough. The debt kept growing like a monster that could never be satisfied. Now he stood in the market, waiting near the fruit vendors where he was supposed to meet someone. His hands shook as he watched people buying mangoes and bananas for their families. Normal people doing normal things. He wondered if he would ever feel normal again. "You are Ravi." A man approached him. He was well-dressed compared to the farmers. Wearing clean clothes and gold rings on his fingers. "I heard you need help with your money problems." Ravi nodded, unable to speak. The man looked around carefully, then moved closer. "I can solve everything today. Your daughter can work in the city. Good job. A nice place to live. Regular meals. She will send money home every month. After 2 years, all your debts will be paid. And she can come back home with savings."
Hey.
The man made it sound so simple, so hopeful.
No.
Like a miracle solution to their impossible situation. "Where exactly will she work?" Ravi asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Textile factory. Making clothes. For export. Very respectable work. Many girls from villages work there. Safe environment, proper supervision." The man pointed to a crate of mangoes that were starting to go soft in the heat. Next to it were some vegetables that should have been sold yesterday. "This fruit, these vegetables, plus $200 cash? Today only? Tomorrow the offer changes." Ravi stared at the overripe mangoes, his daughter's future being measured against rotting fruit. The mathematics of desperation made no sense. But somehow this was all his years of hard work were worth. All his daughter's dreams and intelligence and kindness reduced to the price of produce. That would be thrown away by evening. When Priya arrived at the market with her small bag, she saw her father talking to the stranger. She had braided her long black hair neatly and wore her cleanest dress. Her eyes were bright with curiosity about this adventure to the city that her parents had finally explained to her that morning. "I will work hard and make you proud, Papa," she said, hugging him tightly. "I will send money home and help pay for my brother's school fees." Ravi couldn't look at her face. If he did, he knew he would break down completely and find some other way, even if it meant losing everything else they had. Across the market, Dr. Kavya Sharma was documenting stories for her research on rural poverty. She worked for an international organization studying how families cope with economic crises. She had been in this region for 2 months, talking to farmers and learning about their struggles. Something about the scene near the fruit vendors caught her attention. A middle-aged man was crying while talking to a well-dressed stranger. A teenage girl stood nearby, looking confused but trusting. The body language told a story that Dr. Sharma had seen before in her work, and it made her heart sink. She moved closer, pretending to examine vegetables while listening carefully. Remember, no contact with family for the first 6 months, the stranger was telling Ravi. New workers need time to adjust. Letters and phone calls make them homesick and less productive. But after that, regular communication. Dr. Sharma felt alarm bells going off in her mind. She had heard these exact words before in testimonies from survivors of labor exploitation. The isolation period. The promises of communication later. The focus on productivity rather than well-being. She watched as money and fruit changed hands. She watched as Priya hugged her father one last time, still believing this was a wonderful opportunity. She watched as the girl walked away with the stranger, turning back to wave goodbye with a bright smile. Dr. Sharma knew she had just witnessed something terrible. But she also knew she couldn't intervene directly without proof and without putting the girl in more danger. Instead, she quietly followed at a distance, taking notes and photos. She had learned that sometimes the best way to help was to document everything carefully and build a case that could save not just one person, but many. As Priya climbed into the back of a crowded van with several other young women, she pressed her face to the window for one last look at her father. He was standing exactly where she left him, surrounded by mangoes and wilted vegetables, looking like a man who had just lost his soul. The van drove away in a cloud of dust, carrying Priya toward a future that would test every bit of her strength and courage. Behind her, Dr. Sharma was already making phone calls, beginning an investigation that would eventually change everything. But that was still many difficult months away. For now, a 16-year-old girl with dreams of teaching children was heading into darkness, while the man who sold her for the price of rotten fruit stood crying in the market, wondering if love sometimes meant making choices that felt like betrayal. The van ride took 12 hours, winding through mountains and valleys that Priya had never seen before. She pressed her nose against the dirty window, watching villages pass by in the distance. The other girls in the van were quiet, some sleeping, others staring blankly ahead. None of them seemed as excited as Priya felt about their new jobs in the city. "Have you worked in a factory before?" Priya whispered to the girl sitting next to her, a thin young woman who looked about 20. The girl just shook her head and closed her eyes. "Try to sleep," she said softly. "You'll need your energy." When they finally arrived in the city, Priya's first impression was the noise. Cars honking, people shouting, machines humming from somewhere nearby. The air smelled different too, thick, with smoke and dust that made her cough. This was nothing like her quiet village where the loudest sound was usually the rooster crowing at dawn. The van stopped in front of a large concrete building with no windows on the lower floors. Metal gates surrounded the compound, and guards stood at the entrance. Priya thought it looked more like a prison than a workplace, but she pushed that worried thought away. Her parents had told her that city jobs always look different from village life. "Welcome to your new home," announced the supervisor, a woman with a stern face and calculating eyes. "You will work hard, follow rules, and make good money. Any questions will be answered during orientation." The sleeping quarters shocked Priya the most. 50 metal bunk beds crammed into a room that should have held maybe 20. Each girl got a thin mattress, one blanket, and a small wooden box to store their belongings. The bathroom was shared by everyone, just a few broken toilets and cold water taps that only worked sometimes. "This is temporary," Priya told herself, unpacking her small bag. "Just until I save enough money to help my family." The next morning, reality hit her like a cold wave. The work bell rang at 4 in the morning. No gentle wake-up. No time to wash properly or eat breakfast. Within 30 minutes, all the girls had to be at their assigned stations in the factory floor. Priya's. Job was sewing buttons onto shirts. The same motion, over and over, thousands of times per day. Her fingers quickly became sore, then numb, then started to bleed from the constant needle pricks. The supervisor walked around with a stick, tapping girls who worked too slowly or made mistakes. "Faster," she would bark. "These orders have deadlines. No time for daydreaming." The factory was hot and stuffy. Dust from the fabric filled the air, making everyone cough. The machines were loud, creating a constant roar that gave Priya headaches. Windows were painted black so no one could see outside, and clocks were removed. So the girls lost track of time completely. Lunch was 15 minutes of watery rice and a few pieces of vegetables. Dinner was the same. Many girls were too tired to eat anyway. Priya had lost weight and developed dark circles under her eyes. But the worst part wasn't the physical hardship. It was the growing realization that something was very wrong with the promises she had been given. "When do we get our first salary?" she asked another worker during their brief lunch break. The older girl laughed bitterly. "Salary. They say we have to pay for food, lodging, transportation, and training first. It takes about 2 years to pay off. The debt they claim may be longer if you get sick or make mistakes." Priya felt her stomach drop. "But my father was told I would send money home every month. That's what they tell all the parents. It makes it easier to get the girls to come willingly." That night, lying on her thin mattress, Priya finally understood what had happened to her. She'd been sold, just like the mangoes in the market. The only difference was that mangoes eventually rot and get thrown away. She was expected to work. For years, maybe forever. Many girls cried themselves to sleep every night. Some had been there for 3 years already. Others had given up hope entirely and moved through their days like ghosts. But Priya discovered something unexpected about herself during those first few terrible weeks. Instead of breaking down completely, she started to get angry. And anger, she realized, could be useful. During the few minutes of break time they got each day, Priya began talking to the younger girls. She told them stories from her village, funny tales about her little brothers, descriptions of festivals and celebrations, memories of her mother's cooking. At first, it was just to distract herself from missing home. But soon she noticed that other girls were gathering around to listen. "Tell us about the harvest festival again," 12-year-old Asha would whisper. "The one with all the lights and dancing." Priya would describe the colorful decorations, the traditional songs, the way the whole village would come together to celebrate. For a few minutes, the girls could forget where they were and imagine being somewhere beautiful and free. She also started teaching basic reading and math to girls who had never been to school. Using scraps of paper and pieces of charcoal, she showed them how to write their names and count numbers. Education was something the supervisors couldn't take away from them, even in this place. "Knowledge is power," she would whisper during these secret lessons. "No matter what happens to us, what we learn stays in our minds forever." Meanwhile, far away in her research office, Dr. Kavya Sharma was having trouble sleeping. She couldn't stop thinking about the girl she had seen being sold in the market. Every night she wondered what was happening to her. Was she safe? Was she really in a good job as promised? Or was she trapped in the kind of exploitation that Dr. Sharma had been documenting for years? Dr. Sharma started making phone calls to contacts in the garment industry. She visited factories asking questions about their hiring practices and worker conditions. Most managers were polite but evasive. Some refused to let her inspect the facilities at all. The more resistance she encountered, the more convinced she became that serious problems were being hidden. She also began interviewing families in rural areas who had sent children to work in the city. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Promises of good jobs and regular communication, followed by months or years of silence. Parents who had no idea where their children actually were or how to contact them. "We thought we were giving her a better life," one mother told Dr. Sharma, tears streaming down her face. "Now we don't even know if she's alive." Back in the factory, Priya was becoming a leader without realizing it. Girls came to her with problems, seeking advice or just comfort. She helped settle arguments, shared her meager food with those who were sick, and most importantly, she kept hope alive in a place designed to crush spirits. "We won't be here forever," she would tell them. "Someday people will realize what's happening and come to help us. Until then, we take care of each other." Months after arriving at the factory, Priya had changed. Her hands were permanently stained from fabric dye. Her back ached from hunching over sewing machines. And her dreams of teaching school seemed like they belonged to a different person entirely. But her spirit hadn't broken. If anything, the injustice of her situation had made her more determined to survive and eventually escape. She had no way of knowing that. Dr. Sharma was getting closer to finding her. She didn't know that her story was about to become part of something much bigger, an investigation that would eventually expose the entire network of lies and exploitation that had trapped her and hundreds of other girls. For now, all she could do was endure, help others, and wait for an opportunity that might never come. But Priya had inherited her father's stubborn determination and her mother's gentle strength. Even in the darkest place, she was preparing for the moment when light would finally break through. 6 months had passed since Priya first walked through the factory gates. The seasons had changed outside, but inside the windowless building, every day felt exactly the same. Wake up at 4, work until dark, eat watery soup, collapse on a thin mattress, repeat forever. But Dr. Kavya Sharma had not forgotten about the girl she saw being sold for rotten fruit. In fact, that image haunted her dreams and drove her to work longer hours than ever before. She had spent months building connections with local police officers who actually cared about justice, social workers who weren't afraid of powerful factory owners, and journalists who were willing to investigate dangerous stories. "I need to find specific evidence," she told Inspector Rajesh during one of their secret meetings in a small tea shop. "Names, locations, financial records, something that will hold up in court." Inspector Rajesh stirred his tea thoughtfully. "These factory owners have expensive lawyers and friends in high places. We need an airtight case, or they'll walk free and just move their operation somewhere else." Dr. Kavya had learned to be patient, but every day that passed meant more girls were suffering. She knew that behind the walls of factories across the city, young women were working in conditions that would shock anyone with a conscience. The challenge was proving it in a way that would actually lead to convictions and real change. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mohan, a vegetable seller who delivered fresh produce to several factories in the industrial district, approached her after hearing about her research through mutual friends. "I see things," he said quietly, looking around nervously. "Girls who look sick, supervisors who treat workers like animals, buildings with too many locks and guards for a normal workplace." Mohan had been delivering vegetables to factories for SBC 15 years. He had watched the conditions get worse as owners realized they could get away with almost anything. Recently, his conscience had been bothering him more and more. "There's one factory where I deliver twice a week. The girls there, ... they look hopeless. But there's one who's different. She organizes the others, teaches them things, keeps their spirits up. She reminds me of my own daughter." Dr. Kavya's heart started beating faster. Could this be the same girl from the market? "Can you describe her?" Young, maybe 16 or 17. Long black hair, always braided neatly despite everything. She has this way of standing straight, even when she's exhausted. Intelligent eyes. The other girls look up to her like she's their older sister. It had to be Priya. Dr. Kavya felt a mixture of relief that the girl was alive, and horror that her worst fears had been confirmed. "Would you be willing to help us gather evidence?" she asked Mohan. The vegetable seller was quiet for a long moment. "My own daughter is the same age as some of these girls. If she was trapped somewhere, I would want someone to help her." "Yes, I'll help." Over the next few weeks, Mohan became Dr. Kavya's eyes and ears inside the factory. Started bringing a small hidden camera in his vegetable cart, filming the working conditions and documenting the faces of supervisors. More importantly, he began passing messages to Priya. The first note was simple. "Someone knows what's happening here. Help is coming. Be ready." Priya almost cried when she read those words, carefully written on a piece of paper wrapped around a small onion. For months, she had felt completely cut off from the outside world. Learning that someone knew about their situation and cared enough to help felt like a miracle. She wrote back, "We are 43 girls here, ages 12 to 25, most from villages sold by desperate families. We work 16 hours daily. Many are sick. We need help urgently." This began a careful correspondence between Priya and Dr. Kavya, with Mohan serving as their secret messenger. Through these notes, Dr. Kavya learned detailed information about the factory's operations, the identities of the supervisors, and most importantly, The stories of individual girls who had been trafficked proved to be an incredibly valuable source of information. Her natural intelligence and leadership skills had made her aware of everything happening in the factory. She knew which girls had been there the longest, which supervisors were the cruelest, and how the financial system of fake debts worked to keep everyone trapped. But more than just providing information, Priya began organizing the other girls for whatever rescue operation might be coming. During their few minutes of break time, she quietly explained that help was on the way and they needed to be prepared to act when the moment came. "We might only get one chance," she whispered to small groups of girls. "When it happens, we need to stay together and help each other. No one gets left behind." Some girls were too broken to believe that rescue was possible. Others were afraid that any escape attempt would just make their situation worse. But Priya's calm confidence and careful planning gradually convinced most of them to trust her leadership. Meanwhile, Dr. Kavya was building a case that extended far beyond just one factory. Her investigation had revealed a network of traffickers, factory owners, and corrupt officials who were all profiting from the exploitation of rural girls. The scope of the operation was bigger than she had initially imagined. Looking at hundreds of victims across multiple facilities, she reported to her international organization's headquarters. "This isn't just a few bad actors, it's a systematic business model based on human exploitation." The response was immediate. Resources were allocated for a major investigation. Legal experts were brought in to ensure that any evidence collected would be admissible in court. Most importantly, law enforcement agencies at both local and national levels were coordinated to prepare for simultaneous raids. But Dr. Kavya knew that all the planning in the world wouldn't matter if they couldn't execute the rescue properly. The factory owners had money, connections, and years of experience hiding their crimes. One mistake could result in evidence being destroyed and victims being moved to locations where they might never be found. As winter approached, Priya noticed changes in the factory routine. New locks were installed on doors. Guards seemed more alert. Supervisors were asking more questions about what the girls talked about during breaks. Someone suspected that outside attention was focusing on their operation. "They know something is happening," Priya wrote in her next message to Dr. Kavya. "We may not have much time left." Dr. Kavya realized that they had reached a critical moment. They had enough evidence to proceed, but waiting longer might mean losing their opportunity entirely. The factory owners were clearly becoming suspicious and might shut down or relocate their operation. She made the difficult decision to accelerate their timeline. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment, they would have to create their own opportunity and hope that months of careful planning would be enough. In her final message to Priya, she wrote, "Be ready. It happens soon. You have been incredibly brave. Soon the whole world will know your true worth." Priya folded the note carefully and hid it with the others she had saved. Tomorrow would be another day of endless sewing, another day of watery soup and exhaustion. But now she knew it might also be the day that changed everything. She looked around at the other girls, sleeping fitfully on their thin mattresses, and whispered a prayer for all of them. After months of darkness, light was finally beginning to break through. The night of the rescue, Priya couldn't sleep. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of 42 other girls breathing in the darkness. Some were crying softly. Others were coughing from the dust they inhaled every day at the sewing machines. A few were talking in whispers about their families back home. Dr. Kavya had sent word through Mohan that tonight was the night. After 8 months of planning, gathering evidence, and building legal cases, everything would finally happen in the next few hours. 3 factories would be raided simultaneously. Police teams, social workers, medical personnel, and international observers were all in position. "Are you scared?" whispered Asha, the 12-year-old girl who slept on the bunk next to Priya. A little Priya admitted. "But I'm more excited than scared. Tonight we go home." She had spent the last week quietly preparing the girls for what was coming. Not everyone believed it would really happen. Some were too afraid to hope. Others worried that any rescue attempt would just make their situation worse. But Priya had convinced most of them to trust her and be ready to move quickly when the time came. At exactly 3 a.m., lights in the factory suddenly blazed on. Priya's heart started pounding as she heard shouting and running footsteps from the main building. Car doors were slamming outside. Men were yelling orders in loud official voices. "Everyone stay calm," Priya said quietly, but firmly. "This is what we've been waiting for." The dormitory door burst open, and uniformed police officers entered, followed by Dr. Kavya and several other people Priya didn't recognize. After months of communicating through secret notes, she was finally seeing the woman who had worked so hard to find her. "We're here to help you," Dr. Kavya announced to the room. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore." Some girls started crying with relief. Others seemed too shocked to react. A few tried to hide, afraid that this was some kind of trick or test by the factory owners. Priya stood up slowly, her legs shaking. "Is it really over?" she asked Dr. Kavya. "Yes, dear. It's really over. You're free." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The girls were given warm blankets and hot tea. Medical personnel checked everyone for injuries and illness. Social workers took statements about their experiences. Police officers arrested the factory supervisors and several other people who had been involved in the operation. But the most emotional moment came when Priya was reunited with her parents. Ravi and his wife had been contacted by the authorities and driven to the city to collect their daughter. When Priya saw her father standing in the doorway, both of them broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," Ravi sobbed, holding his daughter tightly. "I never meant for this to happen. I thought I was helping you, but I was so wrong." "It's okay, Papa," Priya whispered. "You were trying to save our family. I understand." Her mother couldn't stop touching Priya's face and hands, as if she needed to make sure her daughter was really there and really safe. "You're so thin," she kept saying. "We'll feed you properly now. We'll take care of you." During the rescue operation, police also arrested the man who had bought Priya for rotten fruit 8 months earlier. They found him in a small office building, surrounded by files containing information about dozens of other transactions. He had been selling girls to factories across the region for years when he was brought out in handcuffs. Priya made a point of looking directly at him. She wanted him to see that she had survived. She wanted him to know that his attempt to reduce her to the value of spoiled mangoes had failed completely. "You thought I was worthless?" she said quietly as he was led past her. "But you were wrong. About everything." The legal proceedings that followed were complex and lengthy. Dr. Kavya had to testify about her investigation. Priya and several other girls had to tell their stories in court. The evidence that had been gathered over months of careful work was presented to judges and juries. But the most powerful moments came when Priya spoke about her experiences. She didn't just describe the harsh working conditions or the lies she had been told. She talked about how the other girls had supported each other, how they had shared knowledge and hope, and how they had refused to let their spirits be completely broken. "They tried to make us feel worthless," she told the court. "But we proved them wrong every single day. We took care of each other. We shared our food when someone was sick. We taught each other to read and write. We kept our dreams alive, even in the darkest place." The judges were impressed not just by her testimony, but by her composure and intelligence. Here was a girl who had been sold like a piece of fruit, yet she spoke with the confidence and wisdom of someone much older. Her true worth was becoming clear to everyone who met her. The trial resulted in convictions for the factory owners, the traffickers, and several corrupt officials who had been protecting the operation. More importantly, it led to policy changes that made it harder for similar operations to function in the future. But Priya wasn't satisfied with just seeing justice done. During the months of legal proceedings, she had been thinking about all the other girls who might still be trapped in similar situations. She had been thinking about the families in rural areas who were still so desperate that they might make the same impossible choice her father had made. "I want to do more than just testify," she told Dr. Kavya one day. "I want to help prevent this from happening to other girls." Dr. Kavya smiled. She had been hoping Priya would say exactly that. "I think you would be excellent at that kind of work. But first, you need to finish your education. You need to learn everything you can about law, social work, and advocacy." Priya nodded eagerly. The dream of becoming a teacher that she had carried from her village was evolving into something bigger. She wanted to become someone who could change systems, not just individuals. She wanted to make sure that no other 16-year-old girl would ever be valued at the price of rotting fruit. The last person to be arrested was the corrupt moneylender from Priya's village. He had been the one who created the impossible debt that forced her father to make such a desperate choice. When the police came for him, he tried to claim that he was just a businessman providing a service to poor families. "I helped them when no one else would," he protested. But the investigation had revealed that his interest rates were designed to trap families in permanent debt. He had been working with the traffickers to identify desperate parents who might be willing to sell their children. His arrest sent a message throughout the region that this kind of exploitation would no longer be tolerated, as the sun set on the day of the final arrests. Priya stood with Dr. Kavya outside the courthouse. 8 months earlier, she had been a frightened village girl being sold to strangers. She was a survivor, a witness, and someone whose courage had helped expose an entire network of criminals. "What happens next?" she asked Dr. Kavya. "Now you get to discover just how much you're really worth," came the reply. "And I have a feeling it's going to be extraordinary." Priya smiled, thinking about all the possibilities ahead of her. Survived the worst that people could do to each other. Now she was ready to show the world the best that one person could accomplish. 2 years after her rescue, Priya stood in front of a mirror in her small apartment near the university. She was adjusting the simple blue dress she would wear to address the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. At 19, she had already become one of the most recognized voices in the fight against human trafficking worldwide. The girl who had once been sold for rotten fruit was about to speak to representatives from every country on Earth. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. After returning home from the factory, Priya had needed months of counseling to process her experiences. Some nights she still woke up thinking she was back on that thin mattress, surrounded by the sound of 42 other girls crying in their sleep. But Dr. Kavya had been right about Priya's potential. With financial support from international organizations and her own determination to succeed, Priya had completed her high school education in just 1 year. She studied every night until her eyes burned, driven by a hunger for knowledge that 8 months of forced labor couldn't diminish. Her first public speech had been at a small conference in her home country. She was terrified, standing at the podium with her hands shaking and her voice barely above a whisper. But when she started telling her story, something magical happened. The entire room fell silent, hanging on every word. "When my father sold me," he cried, she had said that day, "not because he didn't love me, but because he loved me so much that he was willing to break his own heart to try to save our family." Poverty makes people do things they never imagined they could do. That speech was recorded and shared online. Within weeks, millions of people around the world had watched it. Priya received messages from other survivors, from parents who recognized their own desperate situations, and from activists who wanted to support her work. But the message that meant the most came from Asha, the 12-year-old girl who had slept in the bunk next to her at the factory. Asha had also been rescued that night, reunited with her family, and enrolled in school for the first time in her life. "You taught me to read in that terrible place," Asha wrote. "Now I'm the best student in my class. I want to become a lawyer, like you planned to be. I want to help people the way you helped us." Reading that letter, Priya realized that her true worth wasn't just in surviving her own ordeal. It was in the ripple effect of courage and hope that spread to everyone she touched. Her second major speech was at the National Parliament, where new laws against trafficking were being debated. Priya had spent weeks preparing, researching statistics, and learning about legal processes, but when she stood before the lawmakers, she spoke from her heart about the girls who were still trapped. "Right now, while we sit in this comfortable room, there are children working in factories, farms, and other places where they should never be," she said. "They're counting on us to do more than just feel sorry for them. They're counting on us to change the systems that allow this to happen." The laws passed unanimously. More importantly, funding was allocated for education programs in rural areas, support for families in economic crisis, and specialized courts to handle trafficking cases quickly and effectively. Dr. Kavya watched from the gallery as Priya spoke. That day, tears streaming down her face. The frightened girl she had seen being sold in the market had become a powerful advocate who could move lawmakers to action. But Priya's transformation went beyond just public speaking skills. She had returned to her village as a local hero. But more importantly, as someone who understood both the problems and the solutions. Working with international organizations, she helped establish a school that provided free education, meals, and support to children from struggling families. Education is the best protection against trafficking, she explained to donors and government officials. When children are in school, they're safe. When families have hope for their children's future, they don't make desperate choices. School started with 30 students in a converted community center. Then 2 years it had grown to accommodate over 200 children. Priya made sure that every student learned not just reading and math, but also about their rights, about recognizing dangerous situations, and about building the kind of community that protects its most vulnerable members. But Priya's influence extended far beyond her own village. She began traveling to other countries, sharing her story and learning about different approaches to combating trafficking. In Thailand, she met survivors who had been forced to work on fishing boats. In Morocco, she spoke with girls who had been trafficked as domestic workers. In Guatemala, she learned about children who had been exploited in agricultural work. Each story added to her understanding of how trafficking worked globally, but also reinforced her belief that survivors themselves were the key to creating effective solutions. "We don't need to be rescued over and over again," she said during a conference in Brussels. "We need to be empowered to rescue ourselves and others. We need education, economic opportunities, and the chance to become leaders in our own communities." Philosophy led to her most ambitious project yet, a network of survivor-led organizations across 12 countries. Each group was run by people who had experienced trafficking themselves, supported by resources and training from international partners. The impact was immediate and measurable. Communities that had previously been sources of trafficking victims began reporting the suspicious activities of recruiters. Families received support to overcome economic crises without resorting to desperate measures. Most importantly, the narrative around trafficking began to change from one of helpless victims to one of empowered survivors taking control of their own lives. On her 20th birthday, Priya received a letter that brought her to tears. It was from her father, who had struggled with guilt and shame for years after selling her. "My daughter," he wrote, "I used to think that the worst day of my life was when I sold you for rotten fruit, but now I realize it was actually the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to the world. You've saved thousands of children. You've given hope to millions of families. You have shown everyone that a person's worth cannot be measured by their circumstances." Reading those words, Priya understood that she had finally forgiven not just her father, but the entire chain of desperation and exploitation that had led to her trafficking. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what had happened. It meant choosing to focus her energy on solutions rather than anger. Her speech at the United Nations was the culmination of everything she had learned and accomplished. Standing at the podium where world leaders had debated the most pressing issues of their time, Priya spoke with the authority of someone who had lived through hell and emerged stronger. 3 years ago, I was worth the price of rotten fruit, she began. Today I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that every human being has unlimited potential when given the chance to thrive. She spoke about the practical steps needed to end trafficking, addressing root causes like poverty and lack of education, creating economic opportunities in vulnerable communities, strengthening law enforcement cooperation across borders, and most importantly, listening to survivors and supporting their leadership. But her most powerful moment came at the end of her speech, when she spoke directly to any trafficking survivors who might be watching. If you are trapped right now, know that people are looking for you. If you have been rescued but feel broken, know that you can heal and become whole again. If you are a survivor who wants to help others, know that your voice is the most powerful weapon we have against this crime. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. Representatives from every continent stood and applauded. But Priya was thinking about the girls she had left behind in that factory dormitory. The ones who didn't live to see freedom, but whose courage had inspired her every day since. After the speech, Dr. Kavya found Priya in the hallway outside the assembly hall. "How do you feel?" she asked. Priya smiled, thinking about the journey from that terrible market day to this moment of international recognition. "I feel like my worth has finally been measured correctly," she said. "Not in fruit or money or even fame, but in the number of lives we've been able to change together." 6 months later, Priya opened her third school, this one in the mountains where some of the poorest families lived. As she watched children running into classrooms with bright smiles and backpacks full of books, she thought about her own childhood dreams of becoming a teacher. She had become something even better, a teacher who could change the world. One student at a time, one family at a time, one law at a time. The girl who had been sold for rotten fruit had discovered that her true worth was beyond any price that could ever be named.